Thank you, Chad. Great to be back here in Denver. And as much as I wish I could say I graduated in 2012, that's a lot that I would have done since then. I still feel young at heart, and I think it's the mountain air and shaving my head, which you can vouch for. So, as Chad mentioned, my name is Sabato, and I have a confession to make. For most of my career, I viewed social media and online reviews as fake news. And for me, I really struggled with how to process it and what to do with it. And I completely discredited it because instead of facing it, I just ignored it. So I foolishly thought that by engaging it was only going to give more power to that anonymous critic that gave us 2 stars on their universal 5-star scale that they've so deftly calibrated to review the place they got their oil changed last week, the doggy daycare, the nail salon, and then, of course, our restaurant. So over the past 10 years, though, I've come full circle, and I fully embrace the online feedback that we have. And I think it's one of the most valuable tools that we as restaurateurs have to improve our business and create and strengthen relationships with both our guests and our employees. So today I'm going to share my journey from hater to harnessing that social media and online reviews for the benefit of our guests, our employees, and our restaurants. But before I talk about the present, I think it's important that we go back in time a little bit and take a look at how we got here. So, the year was 2004, and that's when Bennifer were grabbing all the headlines. Ron Burgundy was keeping San Diego classy, and that was the year that Jude Law beat me out for People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive. But that was also the year that Yelp launched, giving all of us this amazing feedback that I know everyone out here just loves to read. Fast forward 4 years later, and there we are in 2008. Jay-Z and Beyonce got married. Sarah Palin was keeping an eye on Russia for us, and I think I saw Sex and the City 16 times the first week it opened. And that was the year that Hugh Jackman beat me out for People Magazine's Sexiest Man Alive. But that was also the year that OpenTable launched the platform where diners could give reviews of the restaurants after they dined in them. So prior to that time, the only way that a guest could give feedback was really in person or by phone, writing an old-fashioned comment card, maybe an email or a letter, and those were the traditional channels. And those channels were intended to be read by you, the restaurateur. It was personal, it was intentional, and it really took some serious thought and effort to write that. They had to write their thoughts on paper, they had to sign it, they had to find an envelope, make sure they had the right postage, and seek out a mailbox. But at the end of the day, it created an opportunity for us to listen to our guests, to improve on what we do, and most importantly, it opened that door for us to build a relationship. So you remember when you'd get that note and it would say, "Dear restaurateur, I've been a loyal guest of yours since you first opened. I eat there once a week, was there last week, and something just wasn't right." Well, with the advent of all these new channels, it was as though the manners and the politeness and the accountability that came with that feedback went the way of MySpace. And so instead, it was like a Molotov cocktail being thrown into our worlds and just ruining our day. So when I first started reading those, I really had no idea how to process them, what to do with that feedback, and all I could say is ask myself is, who are these people? Why are they so angry and so hostile? And now just imagine for a moment if the only way you gave feedback to your spouse or significant other was through Yelp, okay? So there you are, you cook a nice dinner, nice bottle of wine, candles lit, some great conversation, you're cleaning up afterwards, ask your wife, "Oh, how was dinner tonight?" "Oh, it was great." Go to bed thinking everything was great, wake up the next morning, and then you have this. Chances are your relationship's not going to be that successful, right? So in 2008, I was the food and beverage director at the Little Nell, and that was the year that OpenTable launched their online feedback. And I began to read reviews on their sites and then went down that rabbit hole and exploring other sites similarly. But what I struggled for most was the fact that there was zero accountabilities for these reviewers. And they lacked any constructive content and were outright spiteful. And then to throw even more salt in the wounds, for me, they were put out there for the world to see with no one validating their credibility. And so there was no way of knowing if the person was a professionally trained chef, if it was a disgruntled server we had let go last week, or if it was that guy that had been skiing in jeans and the orange camo jacket that was upset that we didn't have Goldschlager at the bar. And it was that lack of accountability that really pushed me to take that we don't negotiate with terrorists stance. And I just disregarded social media completely and stopped reading it altogether. So fast forward 6 years later, and I'd like to think that I was 6 years wiser, and I was in New York as Chief Restaurant Officer for USHG, and we had 12 restaurants that I was overseeing at that time. And with restaurants all over the city, it was really hard for me to get a pulse on what was going on the floor of our restaurants each night. So shortly after I started, we began to work with a company that would aggregate all this feedback from different channels and then push it to our inboxes each morning. So after several weeks of reading through them, and I began to see that our guests were actually using these as comment cards, the modern day comment card. So then after several months, we rolled it out to our directors and our general managers so they could start engaging with it. And then we rolled it out to our chefs. How many chefs are with us today? Well, I guess you could probably guess how that went, right? So when we first introduced it to our chefs, that's when I got my PhD as the chef whisperer, because they're like artists, and like the old me, they really discredited them, basically saying, what do these guys know? And so overnight, they went from starting their day hearing "we chef" or "great service last night, chef," to basically the public version or the digital version of a public stoning. And they struggled with it. We had one chef that couldn't eat breakfast after they would read them, another chef that was getting funny looks on the subway as the anger built up inside as they were reading them. But once they started reaching out to the guests and connecting by voice, it began to humanize that feedback that they were getting, and they started looking at that through a new lens. But the real turning point for me came when we were going through a chef change at our Michelin-starred restaurant, The Modern, located in MoMA. And we had an opening chef that had been there for 10 years. And as you can imagine, over 10 years, you develop a very devout following of guests that aren't really afraid to tell you what they think. So during that transition, I was reading the guest feedback, and I was gauging how the changes were being received by our guests. And there were some people that really embraced it, and then there were some of those regulars that weren't afraid to share their constructive feedback with us. So we didn't make any knee-jerk reactions, but what we did was really keep track of those reoccurring themes. And one of those themes was around portion size and value. And so we began to drill down on specific dishes and then dial up the portion size accordingly. So it was really like we were tuning in a radio dial a little bit until we got the right frequency. And after a couple of weeks, all those portion size comments and the value comments disappeared, and they were replaced by praise. So it was that feedback that doesn't naturally come up when you're having a conversation at the table with the guest. And I think we would have struggled to find it, and then if we did, implemented change to really understand how that had resonated with them. So while the comments that we were getting weren't always the easiest to read, I came to realize that they were based on our guest perception, not on our aspirations. And so hospitality is about creating emotions and memories, and this feedback was the most raw, unedited expression of how they felt about dining with us. And I also realized that if any guest were to flag down a member of our team in the restaurant and give us that feedback in the moment, we were going to do everything we could possible to resolve that situation and make sure that guest left happy. So who was I to discredit their opinions just because they chose to voice it online in the moment? And maybe the manager didn't engage the table and give them an opportunity to share that feedback with us. Maybe they were on a business dinner and were doing us a favor and didn't want to cause a scene and embarrass us in front of their guests. So at the end of the day, feedback is a gift, and if they were going to give us an opportunity to make it right for them, they were giving us a chance to make it right for them and also improve on the experience for other guests. So shame on us if that was going to be their last impression of our restaurant. So as soon as we began having chefs and managers engaged with that feedback, they saw firsthand the importance of tearing down that cyber wall, picking up the phone, and addressing those issues head on. And so overnight, they went from being punching bags to being the ambassadors and diplomats of our brand, and it got them out of the kitchen, both figuratively and literally, and they began looking at the guest experience much more holistically, and not just through the eyes of an operator, but through the eyes of our guests. So today, we're here, and 14 years later, since the advent of Yelp and OpenTable, how people use social media has also changed dramatically, and how we as restaurateurs need to use it needs to change as well. So almost all the platforms that I was mentioning up till now were geared more towards consumers, giving consumers insight, not consumers to restaurateurs. And so restaurants weren't the primary intended recipient, and it was just thrown out there on the internet for anybody to Google upon. So one of the fascinating evolutions today is, to me at least, is how social media is used by guests to burnish their personal brands. And you'll see them name-dropping restaurants or posting pictures of it. Does anybody know what happened on July 26, 2010? That was the day that Instagram launched. Where is that? Yep. And that day, there were 9 posts that were posted. And of those 9 posts, 4 of them were food-related, restaurant-related, and of course, there was the requisite cute little puppy that was posted. And you can guess which one had the most likes by about 70,000 of there. But overnight, Instagram became that wish you were here postcard, and also became a way for people to share their love of restaurants and show them celebrating, and it was their way of putting that sort of stamp on their dining passport. And as an operator, that took me back to my 4th grade when I would see that girl that I liked and I'd slip a little note in her locker and telling her that I liked her and asking if she liked me. And I remember how vulnerable I felt when I wrote that letter, and I remember the heartbreak I felt if she didn't respond, but I also remember the butterflies I got when she checked yes, and you can sure as hell bet that I showed every single one of my friends as proof that she did check yes. And so when guests tweet at us today, we want them to get those butterflies. And some of the comments if someone comments on one of our posts or tweets at us, we really have 2 choices. We can either leave it out there for all of their followers to see that it fell on deaf ears and kind of give them one of those sort of things, or we can reach out, engage, and give them that virtual high five for all of their followers to see. So at Bartaco, we strive for 100% table touches in our dining rooms, and now as we embrace social media, we're taking that same approach online for 100% guest engagement with all comments, positive or negative. And for us, that's how we can create relationships that start in the restaurants, but then transcend the 4 walls of the restaurants. So one example of that was we had a couple that came in to have dinner with us one night, and they were going to find out the gender of their baby. And that's a huge moment in their life, and we're honored that they chose to celebrate that with us. So we sent them a onesie to not only congratulate them on that milestone, and that helps us get another future taco aficionado, but it's our way of thanking them for trusting us with that special moment. So hospitality is really about, our industry is about interactions and not transactions, and it's about how we make guests feel. And to this day, I still read every single social media post that comes in, and when our team creates those experiences when guests leave better than when they came, and leave such a lasting impression on them that our guests remember their names and want to share that with the world, that's pretty magical, and that's a reminder why we as restaurateurs do what we do day in, day out. And so it's these type of comments that are the ones that give me the good kind of goosebumps. And hospitality is a team sport, and I couldn't do what I do without our team, and they're the ones that bring our restaurants to life day in, day out. And they create those memories, and just like our guests, I take the approach, if I don't share it, it didn't happen. So I remember as a child the excitement I would get when I'd get some mail, and not the AOL kind, but the really thoughtful, handwritten kind. And in today's high-tech world, I think it's these low-tech interactions that sometimes are the most personal. So I write a handwritten note to any of our employees that get mentioned by name, and I say thank you. I seal it with wax, and then mail it off to the restaurants. And you can imagine the looks I get in my office when you've got this bald guy with a lighter cooking up wax, looking like a scene out of Breaking Bad, but that's one of the highlights of my day when I get to do it. And seeing my team open up that personalized letter, reading it out loud to their peers, and having the rest of their team celebrate how great they made that guest feel really helped me overcome my early animosity towards social media. And so by turning these online comments from a monologue into a dialogue, I found a way to channel that online feedback for the good of our guests, the good of our team, and I'm no longer a hater, and I'm a believer in it. So if our guests and our employees wake up tomorrow and they know that they matter to us and can't wait to come back, that's the ultimate compliment that we as restaurateurs can hope for. And that's the first step in building a long-standing relationship. But it's not the type of relationship that can be bought by likes. It's the type of relationship that gets nourished by hospitality. So thank you.